Hi, I'm Steve Bird. I am the laser shop lead at Forge Greensboro Makerspace, and this is the software portion of your laser shop orientation. We are going to be learning today about Lightburn software. The primary purpose of Lightburn is to convert graphics into laser instructions. However, it can do more than that. You can create your vector art in Lightburn. Now, vector art, if you've ever heard of file formats like SVG, DXF, .ai for Adobe Illustrator, those are all vector file formats. And vector art is art that is based on lines and points, basically. If you want to do any cutting with the laser, you are going to need vectors to do that with. You can also use Lightburn to process pixel-based images. Now, you cannot create pixel-based graphics in Lightburn. You have to create them elsewhere or get them from elsewhere and import them into Lightburn. We're talking about file formats like PNG, JPEG, GIF, things like that. So Lightburn controls most of the lasers in our department, and we are going to jump right in here and learn how to use it.
All right, so a brief tour of what we have here in the software. On the left-hand column, we have a bunch of art tools for drawing and modifying shapes in various ways. Up at the very top, you've got your main drop-down menus. Below that, we have a row of visual tools for various other kinds of manipulation of your view, your alignment, all sorts of stuff like that. This is your cuts and layers menu, which you're going to be spending a lot of time with. You'll notice there are some other tabs beneath here. So this shares space with some other windows. You might see more tabs down here. If you do, and you don't know what they are, don't worry about it. Then below that is the laser window. This is where you can send files to the laser. You can set your job origin, tell it how to, handle the things that is being sent to the laser, and control which device you are using. Again, there are some tabs that are underneath here. You might have more than just these two. And if you do, don't worry about them for now. Sometimes people might have accidentally done something like this. Let's see, can I get this to happen? Yeah. So they've got the cuts and layers separated somehow, and they might have moved it down here. You might have things in weird places. If you ever find that, you can always just come back up to the window drop-down and hit Reset to Default Layout. And then everything should be back where it should be. So in the software here, we are going to be importing a pixel-based image of the Forge's logo. Then we are going to be drawing an ellipse around it and a circle next to it. It's going to be basically a Forge branded little keychain fob. So first thing I'm going to do is bring in the image. You can drag and drop it if you want, but right now I'm going to say File, Import. I've got a couple of different Forge logo files here. One's a PNG, one's a JPEG. They will both work just fine. I will bring in the PNG. Why not? Oh, except one thing that I forgot to do is down here under Devices, I am controlling Big Thunder. Big Thunder is not the laser you're going to be learning to use today. Instead, we are going to be using Blue Jay. It takes a moment because I'm actually recording this from home, not at the Forge. So it's trying to communicate with Blue Jay, and it's not being able to communicate. So eventually, it will give up. You'll notice that down below, I have this thing that says no device found. And you'll also notice this re-rendered over here. The reason for that is that this represents the whole bed of the laser that you're working with. And since Big Thunder is larger, it had a smaller, finer grid on here to represent the essentially further out view you were having to take of the bed. Now, Blue Jay is smaller, so we're essentially able to get a little bit more resolution on that. Now, where did my Forge logo go? Well, I'm going to zoom out, and you'll see it's way down here. That's because it was placed in the center of Big Thunder's bed, which is way outside the scope of Blue Jay's bed. So I'm going to bring this up here. One reason why it's really important to choose the device before you get too far into your job is that different lasers have different home corners. So at least 2 of our lasers have their home corner at the back left. At least 2 of our lasers have their home corner at the back right. So if you are changing from one laser that has one home corner to another laser that has another home corner, things are going to flip as a mirror image. But if you also have some text in there, we're not going to be going into text in this video, but if you have text in there, sometimes that doesn't flip right and it can be kind of a pain. So it's usually a good idea to make sure that you get your device chosen before you start importing images or drawing graphics. So right now, this is over 7 inches by about 3.5 inches. So that is way too big for a keychain fob unless you are working for a gas station at the side of the interstate where you have a lot of people coming in and borrowing the bathroom key and you want to make sure they don't walk off with it. In that case, you might want a 7 by 3.5 inch keychain fob. I'm not going to be doing that today. So I want to resize this. There are numerous ways that we could resize this. If you mouse over one of these corner control squares and hold your mouse button down, it will allow you to zoom this thing in or out. Actually, so let me zoom in here a little bit. So notice that if I come out here over the little round arrows, it gives me a little round arrow when I mouse over it, saying that if I were to hold my mouse button down now and do something, it would rotate the thing, which is not what I want. I'm going to undo. If you mouse over these little corner handles, it is supposed to give you a little diagonal arrow there instead of your cursor, but it doesn't seem to be doing it right now on mine. You should, when you mouse over the square, get a little diagonal arrow pointing this direction or this direction. And when you get that, you'll know that you can resize this. You'll notice that it will not change the proportions as I do this. If I hold down my Shift key, it will allow me to change those proportions. That is the opposite from how these things work in some software, and actually the opposite from how it works in some other contexts here. So I can bring this in this way to make it smaller. I can also do that with the width and height inputs over here. You'll notice this padlock is currently locked. And what that means is that if I change my width or height numerically, the other one will change proportionally. So if I set this to, say, 2 inches wide, it then changes the height to be just over 1 inch. If I had had this padlock unlocked, then I could change one of these and the other one would not change. And sometimes you want that. Just depends on what you're doing. In this case, I do not. So there are some speeds and powers. You'll notice this is on layer 01. I'm actually going to set this to layer 00, which is black. So you've got 30 different colors down here. Each one of those represents a separate set of instructions you can send to the laser. You're not going to use all 30 in most cases unless you're creating one of those test cards that I have sitting around the shop. But usually you're going to use no more than 1 to maybe 5 of them, usually more like 1 or 2. So I am going to set this to layer 00. You'll see layer 00 has a speed and power associated with it. That speed and power was set by the previous person to use this layer for an image in this computer. So your numbers may be looking very different here as you go through this. I'm then going to deselect my shape. So I did that by selecting my selection tool and clicking outside here somewhere. Zoom in a little bit more. I'm then going to choose my 01 layer, and I'm going to draw my circles and ovals on that layer. So, selected 01, have my ellipse tool selected, and then going to draw out an oval. Okay. I'm then going to grab my selection tool, and when you mouse over the center of either your image or your certain oval graphic here, you should get a little 4-directional arrow that shows up there. But if I grab this by that center control handle, you notice that just moves the shape around. And because of the snap settings that we have here, you'll notice this wants to snap to the center of that. Now I could also have selected everything here and use this little align both vertical and horizontal centers tool. Now when I selected these things, you'll notice, as long as you don't have red-green color blindness, which more people do than folks realize, that if I drag right to left, this thing turns green. And if I bring it to just right here, where it's just overlapping the corners of those two shapes, it still selects everything. So right there like that. If I go left to right, you'll see that this box is red. And so if I just come right over the corner of these things, nothing is selected. But if I surround them entirely, they are selected. These can be useful if you've got a design that has a lot of little parts arranged on your bed and you need to more easily select these but not those. This difference can be helpful. And the mnemonic device that I use for this is green is greedy, right? So this oval looks like it's a little small for what I want it to do here. So I am going to unlock the width and height proportions, since they don't really need to be proportional to each other necessarily. I'm going to make this 2.75 inches, let's say. Oops. Be better if I could type 7.5. There we are. And maybe 1.75 inches tall. There we are. That looks good to me. Then I'm going to grab my ellipse tool again. So now I'm going to draw the little keychain hole that the ring will go through. So I'm going to grab my ellipse tool once again. I'm going to hold down my shift key this time while I draw out a circle. So if I hold down my shift key, you'll notice that it will not do an oval. It will only do a circle. If I release my shift key, it allows you to get an oval in here. Hold down shift again. And that is somewhat different from what it does for an image. So I just wanted to point that out to you. Right now, the circle that I've drawn is a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch in diameter, which is bigger than I probably want it to be. So I'm going to make sure that my padlock here is locked. It was unlocked for changing the oval here. I now want it locked for changing this because it's already a circle. So I want it to remain a circle. And I'm going to set it to about 0.15 inches in diameter. I'm going to drag it up about right where I want it. But then I'm going to select all 3 of my shapes and go to my Align Selected Objects Horizontally tool menu here. So I'm going to click that and choose Align H Center. Now I know that all 3 of these items are lined up on the same horizontal line here. So let's go ahead and look at our speeds and powers. This is up here in our cuts and layers. Now I want anything that's inside my outermost cut shape to happen before the outermost cut shape. The reason for that is on some of the lasers, and Blue Jay is one of them, you're usually going to want something you're cutting out to be lifted up off the bed. So when the actual cut is made, that piece will then settle or tip or something like that. And you want to make sure that everything that's supposed to be on that shape or inside that shape is engraved or cut first so that it will still be in focus and in the right location. So right now, my line layer is set to be executed before my image layer. So I'm going to select that image layer. I'm going to hit this little up button on the right, and that will move it into position. So here in the Cuts Layers window, we've got the name of the layer. Now that is set by users, and since you're working on a public computer, you have no idea what the maniac before you is doing. So ignore whatever it says here in this first column. If it says like cut 3mm Baltic birch or something like that. Somebody named it that at one point, and It doesn't necessarily have those settings set on it anymore. By default, it would say C00, C01, C02, etc. The actual layer number is listed right here along with its color. What is the image mode? For pixel-based images, it's just image. There's nothing else you can do with it. For vector layers, you can have line, fill, or much more rarely, offset fill. Usually it's one of these two. We are using a line. Then it has what speed and power has been set for that particular layer. We then have output, that is this set of instructions going to actually be sent to the laser? There are situations where you don't want it to be. We're not going to be going into any of those today. Show is just, can I see it over here? People usually don't turn that off, but if they have, pay attention. And then air, that only is relevant for the thunder lasers that we have at the moment. That might change with other lasers we get or whatnot, but you can ignore those for now. Apparently I've got more tabs showing up down here. Let me go back to reset to default layout. There we are. Okay, let's double click on our image layer here. I'm just going to double click on this little black chip that says 00, and it opens up our cuts settings editor. So I had already set this up before we got in here to a speed of 200 and a max power of 18, which is probably not bad settings for an image layer. Although we've got those little test cards that are usually around the department that will give you an idea of what speed and power combinations will do. Minimum power for an image layer is really irrelevant. I actually kind of wish they would disable that for image layers, but they didn't. Essentially, minimum power is what it does when the laser can't move the speed you told it to move. And for an image, all of the area where it's moving too slowly is going to be outside of the image. We don't need to go into that more than that. Settings you need to make sure you check because you're at a public computer, and again, you have no idea what the person before you was doing. We've got negative image. That's one that people will sometimes turn on if they are engraving a photographic type image on stone or glass or acrylic. Because in those cases, where the laser hits, it turns it frosty rather than turning it dark and burnt. And so if you are trying to engrave photographic type images, you don't want it to look all ghostly and weird. And so you would turn it to negative. So the person before you may have turned it to negative and you might not be expecting that. Always check that. Line interval. If you look over here on your left, you see a little representation of what the laser head will be doing for this job. You'll notice there's a little green dot there. You might be able to tell it's green. And then the laser is going to burn starting from right to left. It will then reach the end of that line, and you'll notice that little faint red line there. That's it moving up to the next line that comes over from left to right, moves up again, right to left, moves up again, left to right. Each of those little red lines are 0.1 millimeters. That's what the line interval is here. And that comes out to 254 dpi. Essentially, this is a metric way of measuring it. This is an inches way of measuring it. You can put it in either way, and the other one will come out. 0.1 is the default we usually go with. You might, in various cases, set it a little bit higher or a little bit lower, but unless you have learned a little bit more, go ahead and leave it at 0.1. Most of the rest of this down here, people don't tend to mess with. Image mode. This is very important for image layers. So right now, this is set to dither. And you see this test pattern down below that shows what dither does. If I show you very briefly grayscale, we don't use grayscale as an image mode on CO2 lasers very much because they just don't work well with it for reasons we don't need to go into. But that shows you what the test pattern looks like down below. So, threshold is one that can be very useful if all you've got is black and white and no gray of any sort. What it does is it says if the image is dark enough in a particular area, it will treat it as solid black. If it's not dark enough in that area, it will treat it as solid white. If I just say OK here and preview my job, well, I have cut selected graphics turned on, which the computers at the Forge usually also have turned on. So it says, well, I can't preview anything because you have nothing selected. So I'm going to dismiss that and select all the stuff. Now I'm going to hit preview. And you will see that the drop shadow here is ignored. That's because it's not dark enough, so it's treated as solid white. And you could say, fine, I like it like that. We're going to go with that. But I'm going to show you some other options we've got. By the way, these red areas here are all showing places where the laser head is traveling somewhere without the laser being turned on. We can talk more about that in your buddy cuts. All right, so I'm going to close this. If I want to modify how this image is handled, I can do it by going back and forth between that cut settings editor and then hitting my preview button, but there's a more direct way of doing it. So if you left click your image and then right click it, oddly enough, in certain situations in this software, simply right clicking something doesn't do it. You got to left click, then right click. It's a little weird. So I'm going to come down to adjust image, and I get this adjust image window. So you can see down in the bottom left area, we have layer settings, and image mode is set to threshold, as we saw earlier. So I'm going to resize this so that we can see it better. There we are. So for image mode, threshold is what it's currently set to, and you see what it's going to do. So I'm going to run you through these very quickly. I'm probably going to do another video later that goes into these in more detail. But ordered will give you grayscale, but it will look like a 1990 Macintosh. I have memories of playing Risk on a friend's 1990 Macintosh my freshman year of college. Atkinson will have a scatter of pixels. They're scattered around a little more randomly. Atkinson is a little bit more high contrast than the next three, which are all very similar as well. But we've got Dither, which is generally considered the industry standard. You can come down here and do Stucky, which is very similar, and Jarvis, which is very similar. Atkinson, Stucky, and Jarvis basically do the same thing. They just use different algorithms for it. In all of them, they scatter single pixels of all the same size at different distances from each other to create different levels of black, white, and gray. Newsprint and halftone instead have a scattering of pixels that are the same distance from each other, but they are larger or smaller. So newsprint looks like an old black and white newspaper that any of you who are younger than maybe 45 probably don't remember. I remember them from my youth. So you can see the black dots here are much larger than the black dots down here. Halftone is very similar to that, but it gives you more control. You can tell it how far apart those larger and smaller pixels are, and you can change the angle over which they run. And generally for halftone, I'm going to be running somewhere between 75 to 125 cells per inch, based on what kind of detail I'm trying to get and other effects that I might be looking at. For the moment, I'm going to go ahead and go with Dither. You can see that when I zoom in here, there's a fair amount of space between many of the black pixels. That's good because the actual pixel that the laser is going to draw is going to be a little larger than that black pixel. So we want to make sure that some of the white is going to show through. Now, these little white pixels will not show because the black pixels will crowd them out. But that's one of the downsides of that. One of the reasons you might want to go with halftone, but again, we're not going further into that in this case. So that looked good to me. I'm going to click OK. For the line, I'm going to double click it in the cuts and layers window. So right here, I have a speed and a max power set to good values for Blue Jay here. So we're going to be moving the laser head when it's cutting at 20 millimeters per second. You can use line layers to just score things. Just go ahead and draw things. So the speed and power you use determines whether it's going to be cutting or drawing. This is a good cutting speed. 62% power is the max we're allowed to use on Blue Jay. This is giving you the maximum amount of power you can safely get from the tube that we have, but the power supply can supply more power than the tube can take. So we are saying, hey, power supply, give me 62% of your power, which is the most that the laser can take. There should be some controls in the laser that keep you from going over the max power, but we're going to ask you to go at 62 and not higher. If nothing else, just that you know that if you go from 62 to 75 to 80 to 90, you're getting no difference. It should still be 62. The minimum power I'm setting to 30. Minimum power is what happens when the laser can't move the speed that you told it to move while firing the laser. So if you have sharp corners, or if you have very tight curves, then it probably will not be able to get above a certain minimum speed as it navigates those things. And so in those cases, it ramps down to the minimum power. Our mode is set to line. Fill and offset fill are your two others. Usually line and fill are the only ones we use, but if you're cutting or drawing, you want to use line. Down below, in terms of settings that some people set that you may not be expecting to be set, number of passes. Usually I like to go one pass and just go high enough power and slow enough speed to do my cut on one pass. Some people prefer going a lower power at maybe a faster speed and running it multiple times. So someone may have number of passes turned on higher. Down below, we've got a perforation mode and tabs and bridges. Just make sure those are off unless you're using them for a particular reason, but this being a beginning course, we're not going into those right now. All right, I will click OK. We then want to look at our job origin. So right now, my job origin is set to top left. Now remember, when this is down on the bed, top means back. So this is the back left corner of the machine. And if I select all of my things I want to send to the laser, you'll notice I get a little green square at the top left corner of the bounding box of my job. That's because this is here. If I choose a different corner or the center, and in this case it's hard to see it in the center because of the handle that's there, but if I choose other ones, then those, whatever we've chosen, is set to the job origin. Now, when you get to the machine itself, you can tell the machine where the laser head is. You can move it to the right place and then set that as your job origin. So whatever job origin you have set on the machine is going to be equivalent to the job origin that you set here in the laser software. So right now, if I send this to the machine, wherever the origin point has been set for the laser head, the job will be done to the right and to the front of that spot. So make sure you have paid attention to your job origin. So with all these things selected, I'm going to hit my preview button. Looks like a computer monitor up here. And you can see, once again, the red areas, which is the show traversal moves here, are showing us where the laser moves, that it isn't doing anything. I said that minimum power is irrelevant for images. That's because any of the slowing down and speeding up it has to do happen out here in this pink area outside of the black lasered area. If you zoom in here, you can see it shows you literally where the laser is turning on and where the laser is turning off. So here's a pass, it's going to on, off, etc. Reading this and sort of figuring out what it's actually going to give you can be a little tricky, and even I still can get it wrong a little bit, but it gives you at least an idea of what it's doing. So sometimes this might be set to invert. Again, if the person before you has been working with glass, stone, or acrylic, they might have hit invert to be able to see what it will actually look like. We do not want that on right now. So I'm going to hit play. You'll notice I have a playback speed set at 10 times. I'm going to hit play, and it's going to show me a 10 times speed animation of this. You'll notice the job will take 1 minute, 40 seconds. And you should have seen that all of the image in the middle here is going to finish being engraved before it then does this keychain hole, before it then cuts the outside part out. It's always a good idea to run a preview before you send this stuff, because you will see things show up that you didn't think were going to show up, and then that alerts you to a problem before you send it to the laser, and then have it giving you problems or waste some material or whatnot. So I'm going to click OK. And I've pretty much done everything. So to review, we imported our pixel-based image, resized it as we wanted it. We set its speed and power the way that we wanted, and we changed its image mode to handle the grays and things like that the way we wanted it to. We then drew our ellipse and our keychain hole circle, assigned those to a layer, told that to be a line rather than a fill, gave it a speed and power that's appropriate for cutting. Check to make sure output is on for both of these, which we do want in this case. Then, down below, we have set our job origin. Cut selected graphics and use selection origin is on, which is how things are usually set at the Forge. Optimize cut path is on. Leave this on and do not click optimization settings. Those are set the way we want them to. The way they're currently set, that makes sure that this inner circle is cut before the outer oval. We don't want to mess with that. You don't want to be the one who messed with it and then makes other people have jobs that don't turn out right. And before all of that, we made sure that the correct laser was chosen, Blue Jay in this case. So at that point, we can go ahead and hit send. Now, as I said, I'm at home, not at the Forge. So when I hit send, it's going to look for the laser for about 5 seconds. First it says I have not selected anything and I have cut selected graphics on. So I'm going to select things. Then I'm going to hit send. You know, in the software instruction business, we say that we never make mistakes. We only create teaching opportunities. So this now gives us this more expected error. There was a problem sending data to the laser. The machine may be busy or paused. I'm going to click OK. You'll notice down at the bottom it says file upload failed. Now, if you are at the Forge and you're pretty sure you are on the network, one way to deal with this would be to right-click on this Devices button. And then it goes and searches the network again, and hopefully we'll find that laser, unless the Ethernet's been unplugged or there are, certain other issues. It could be that the previous job had been paused but not canceled. That's another thing that can happen. If none of those things apply, then when you right-click this, it should then say found and the model number of the controller. That is one way you can troubleshoot. So at that point, I have theoretically sent this to my laser, and then the video where I show the operation of Blue Jay is the next step in what you're going to do. So thank you very much, and if you have problems with the software, well, we're going to run you through some buddy cuts, so hopefully we should run through some of those things. But after your buddy cuts, when you're using this on your own, feel free to post questions on Slack or schedule time with me or one of the other mentors to go over what's going on. Also, Jeff Thomas is, at this point in time, teaching a more intermediate to advanced Lightburn class. So if you want to learn more about some of these things, you can sign up for that class as well. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this, and I look forward to seeing you in the laser shop and making cool stuff. Thank you very much.